talk about his book, Don Benito Wilson, From Man of Mountains to Fame. Please welcome Mr. Rick.
It's great to be in Westwood to talk about this. This is the first time that I've talked in Westwood about this book. This man owned Westwood. So he bought it for $1,600 in 1852. I do have a checkered background, which led to my writing. She mentioned some of that, but stand-up comedy, Navy captain, exchange student to the Soviet Union in one of the very, very first, just as the Iron Curtain opened in 1960. Arrested by the KGB there. Let's see what else. Stood at both poles of the earth, north and south, one of fewer than 100 people to do that. Marched with Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So it's kind of a peripatetic and interesting time. I was a reserve LAPD cop, worked undercover vice in Hollywood, which is where I first met one of the people in this room. Not really.
We were
and gang suppression in South LA. So a lot of different things. And I've written a number of books, and I want to talk about two of them today. One is nonfiction and one is fiction. And the circle of ordinary people, ordinary lives, novels, fiction about ordinary people and ordinary things that they do starts here, and it becomes more and more and more unusual until the two meet at a barbed wire fence somewhere down here. Just the most bizarre imaginable things in fiction and the 2016 presidential campaign, to mention, or a gay terrorist bombing his fellow gays in the name of Allah. I mean, it's just the world, the reality that we live in is putting fiction writers out of business.
Nice.
And I drove a cab in Chicago. That's another thing I did. And I graduated from college. It was my first job with a BA in history. What else can you do with a history degree? And I signed up for the Navy to go in. Navy. I was accepted to Officer Candidate School, but they said it'll be a few months before your class starts. So we'll find you. We'll get you when that time comes. So I decided to do something I'd never be able to do again. So I drove a cab in Chicago, checker cab. And I'll tell you a little story about one of my fares. Picked up a elegant woman and her well-bred daughter on North Lakeshore Drive, which is the Gold Coast. And they wanted to go to Carson Peary Scott, which was an upscale emporium in the Loop, which is what they call the downtown. To get there, we had to go through kind of a seamy neighborhood, and we were stopped at a traffic light, and the little girl looked out the window, and there were a number of women on the curb who were wearing more makeup than Revlon suggested for that season. Skirts were higher than fashion allowed at the time, and they were beckoning the cars. And the little girl said to the mother, she said, "Mommy, who are those women?" She said, "Oh, those are mommies waiting for their children." And I turned around the seat. I said, "Wait a minute, lady. I just finished 4 years of a humanities degree, and I'm telling you that's a pretty high accomplishment in this world. I have a degree, and this is a tell it like it is world. Those are hookers. You should tell the little girl those are hookers." Well, the light changed. We drove on. No one said anything for quite a while. Finally, the little girl broke the silence. She said, "Mommy, are hookers mommies?" She said, "Certainly, darling. That's where taxi cab drivers come from."
Well played.
In 1982, as a cop, I arrested a man who looked like CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And I'm filling out their arrest report. I said, what's your name? He gave me his name. What's your address? He said, I don't have one. I said, what do you mean you don't have an address? He said, I'm homeless. I said, you gotta be kidding me. You're dressed this way and you're home. And this bell went off in the back of my head. I said, wow, if you're homeless, but you dress in a crisp suit and tie every day, you don't have 95% of the disadvantages of being homeless. You can walk into any hotel, fit into the buffet line during the meeting break. And so I kept thinking about this. 30 years went by. So I became a stand-up comic. I played clubs, improv, Comedy Store, and Ice House, and traveled all over the western U.S. and Canada doing gigs. And then I went to writing books, did a lot of other things. 30 years later, I said, you know, I've been thinking about this for 30 years. I'm going to put the other writing assignments aside, and I'm going to write the story about the homeless man who dresses well. So I made it about a cop, and I knew something about that, who was framed by the mob, and so he has to drop out and go underground on the run. And it ends up in a homeless camp with 4 people that we get to know quite well. And a way to dress well it comes to him as an opportunity. And he's in a hotel, and a guy comes up to him and he said, are you here for the Rotary Club? And he says, so what's that? And in his homeless camp, they gave him an old boat to sleep in. There's an old boat on the Hard. And the other guys have tents. He's got no money to buy a tent, so he sleeps in this old boat with, they don't want to sleep in because of the rats. So he's in this 27-foot Catalina on the Hard. So the guy said, well, let me ask you this, do you live here in town? He said, well, I live on a yacht here. And he said, well, what is your classification? He said, what's that? He said, what's your profession? He said, I manage my own money. He said, you're just the kind of person we're looking for in Rotary. He says, please be my guest. So he goes, they sit at the table with the mayor. People begin to thrust their business cards on him. They say, you know, I'm the president of a nonprofit, and we are always looking for people on our board. Would you consider this? And people who, so they want to sell him insurance. Or, you know, could I buy you lunch and talk about my investment plan? And so he networks his way to great success. But every night he climbs the fence, and he sleeps in the homeless camp. So how he can dress so well is a plot point, and then why he doesn't use his success then to get a roof over his head is another of the plot points, of course. It's my first novel. In this life, I've written a new novel every 77 years. So this was it, and very nervous about that. I'm very comfortable with nonfiction, but would people find it funny? It's zany, crazy, funny. I've been in humor all of my life. I was a cartoonist. I didn't mention that. Published my first cartoon at 11. So I've really been in humor and then stand-up comedy. Been in humor of some form all of my life, and the stand-up was very helpful to my writing humor, because stand-up comedy, you get an instant response, an instant vote. Is this funny or not? You know right then. Normally, as a writer, you only know kind of third hand or long time after you write. But that was a real experience. Stand-up comedy, there's a train coming at you. This large, bright light in your eyes. The stand-up comic cannot see anyone in the audience past about the third row. You can only see the first. You ever wonder why the comic always picks someone from the first row? Those are the only people he can see. Can't see anybody else. Then you have to have a strong laugh every 15 seconds. 4 strong gags a minute. So you got a 30-minute gig. Yes, you got to have 120 really good, strong. So that's really good training, and I used it in here. This is a. I'm fascinated by writers like Vladimir Nabokov, who used the loom of language to weave, symphonies, putting common words together in uncommon ways that just make me pause the plot and go back. I've got to read that again. The use of those words. So I'm no Nabokov, but it's written with someone who loves the language, and someone with that humanities degree that I talked about. So there are what I call IDs, intellectual delights, throughout the book. For example, the man who invites him to go to the Rotary Club is Alex Selkirk. It turns out he comes over from Catalina Island every, that day of the week. So he comes over, and if you don't know, if Alex Selkirk doesn't mean anything to you, it's a name, you go right on. But if you do, you say, wait a minute, Alexander Selkirk is the sailor who was marooned on the Pacific Island for years. That was the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe. This is the Robinson Crusoe, Alex Selkirk. So he comes over. One of the first people to read the book said, this is kind of absurd. Who's going to come over from Catalina Island every week to the Rotary Club? The very first Rotary Club I spoke to about this book, guy met me in the parking lot, said, I'll help you in, help you with the boxes. He said, I come over from Catalina Island every week to this Rotary Club. Well, to the Alhambra Rotary Club, as it turns out. How many know what a palindrome is? You know what a palindrome? Okay. If you don't know what a palindrome is, there's a Church of the Palindrome in here, and the minister talks kind of funny. And you two are going to immediately say, wait, I got it. Everything the minister says is a palindrome. It reads backward and forward the same way. Whether it's a word, a sentence, or a paragraph. An entire paragraph, trace it back, it's the same both ways. And it's kind of a little delight. You discover, hey, I got it. So that makes it fun. It's zany, it's crazy. There have been enough sold now that I can get a gauge on how many people like it and don't, because humor's a tricky commodity. It's either your humor or, it's not your cup of tea. It's running about 80-20 in my favor. And so 1 out of 5 of you aren't going to like it. And of the 80%, half of those like it, enjoyed it, and half of them really like it and pass it on to others and encourage others to read. So that's this guy. Let me talk about Benjamin Davis Wilson. How many have heard of B.D. Wilson? Benjamin Davis Wilson. One person. When you read this book, and you will read it, when we finish here, you're going to be so fascinated. You're going to want to read this one. Every page, you're going to say, I can't believe I never heard of this guy. He is so important. How did I not know about Don Benito Wilson? Mount Wilson Wilson. And the reason you didn't know about it was because nobody had written the book. But historian after historian has said it's remarkable that a person of this importance has never met his biographer. I mean, you find that in literature throughout Southern California over the years. And the reason nobody had written a book was because the Huntington Library had 50 boxes of his papers and a policy that only one scholar at a time could study any one collection. So the alpha male historian of Southern California said, stay away from Wilson, I will write the book on the great man. And that alpha male historian would grow old and die, and another alpha male historian would take his place and say, I will write the book on Wilson. And he would die. Finally, the Huntington Library changed its policy, and a publisher who knew me asked me to write the biography. She said, you're a reader, you're a scholar at the Huntington Library, so you've got access, you know, it's now open to all of the scholars. So I'm glad I did. Let me give you just a little thumbnail of this remarkable man. He was born in 1811. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson are still alive. King George III is still alive. Maybe a couple of dozen people in all of the United States of America have ever heard of a sleepy, dusty little pueblo called Los Angeles, which is in Spain on the other side of the continent, their continent. It's 1811. He dies in 1878. Everybody in the United States of America knows Los Angeles. There are wires along poles. There are steel rails in the street. There are sidewalks. There are multi-story brick buildings. It's a Los Angeles that we then would begin to recognize. And he spans that period. The time he's born, there's the United States, there's Spain over here, and in between there are 1 million square miles of unmapped territory occupied by 360,000 Indians and about 1,000 Rambo Yahoo mountain men running around killing beavers for the fashionable top hats of Europe. And he's one of those mountain men. Chances of survival are exactly to the decimal, same as the survival rate of Marines in World War II. The first American had come in and killed the chief and the top warriors to take their scalps back to Mexico City for the ransom of the, there was a, there was a reward for scalps, and so he, a really, really, really bad guy, American. So he comes in and says, hi guys, I'm an American, you know. They tie him up, take all of his clothes off of him, build a fire for him, and then do their dance. You know, the Lord, thank you for what we're about to, that dance. And can't you see this in the movie? He's got no clothes on, and the Indians, oh yeah, and they're dancing, and the flickering flame. You see him in the flickering flame. And a friendly chief undoes his bonds, and he takes off running. Very quickly they see that the entree has just left the plate, and they take off after him. It's their territory, they have horses, they have clothes. For 160 miles, mountains and deserts, he eludes them. Ends up in Santa Fe, becomes a very successful trader. He's a criminal. He's smuggling brandy. If you were an American in Santa Fe in the 1830s, you were a criminal. There was no question about it. there was no other way. There was no other way to do business in their Byzantine kind of bureaucracy other than to do it outside of the law. So any American there was doing business illegally, and he was making a lot of money. So Mexicans farther south in Mexico, this is part of Mexico, Santa Fe, said, you know what happened in Texas when we let Americans come in? They took the state away from us. So the way to keep that from happening in New Mexico is to kill all the Americans. So they were on their way up to do that. And all of the Americans left Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the same party, the Roland Workman Party of 1841. It was the first overland party to come here, and our guy is part of that. The Mexican law said if you're not a citizen, you can't own land within 75 miles of the frontier. Frontier, in this case, being the Pacific Ocean. He did not want to give up his American citizenship, did not want to convert to Catholicism. So he bought Riverside and bought it for $1,000 and settled down to be a ranchero. They gave him a name, Don Benito. His name is Benjamin. Benito means little Ben, but it's a joke. You're looking at Don Benito. He was about 6 feet, I'm about 6 feet. He's about 200 pounds, I'm about 200 pounds. He had rugged good looks, I'm about 200 pounds. So he settled down, he's a ranchero. They make him the mayor, alcalde of the Inland Empire. And he gets very involved in politics, and there's a squabble between the present governor, Micheltorena, and a past governor, Pio Pico. And the two raise armies, and they meet in the San Fernando Valley. And our guy single-handedly determines the outcome of the battle. He goes out under a flag of truce, an imperfect flag of truce. They're still shooting at him. But he talks enough of the guys on the other side into switching sides that Micheltorena flees deep into Mexico. Pio Pico, as you know from your California history, will be the last Mexican governor of Alta California. And as we find out in the back of the book, Pio Pico will be a pallbearer for Don Benito Wilson. So Pio Pico comes in and says, I have this problem in the San Bernardino Mountains. There are these renegade Indians who are swooping down, stealing the cattle. It's impossible for people to settle down and have farms there. I will give you my army. Like the mayor of Gotham City says to Superman, you know, I'll give you my police force to stamp out. So I'll give you my army if you go. So he went up in the San Bernardino Mountains. The first European, first non-Indian ever to go into those mountains. They killed 22 bears in 11 days. So he named the place Bear Lake. So here's another of these Hollywood moments. He finds the Indian he's looking for. The Indian recognizes that he is there not as a friend. And he draws an arrow, threads his bow, and fires it. And I'm figuring about a second. So it's however long that takes. Don Benito's on his horse. He sees the movement begin in the first part of that second. Doesn't have time to reach for his rifle. Doesn't have time to draw his revolver. So he does a Hollywood shoot from the hip. And I see this in super slow-mo. Super slow-mo. The arrow and the bullet crossing in the middle of the screen. Okay? Can't you see that? And both shots are fatal. Bullet kills the Indian. The arrow strikes him in the shoulder, but it's a poison arrow. Falls off his horse, paralyzed, can't speak. A friendly Indian, for the third time in his life, saves his life by sucking enough of the poison out of his shoulder that he was very, very, very sick. But he lived. Got his strength back. Now the Indians that he's looking for are in a place called Agua Caliente. We have another name for it. We call it Palm Springs. So he takes his, he puts together a huge supply train. They're gonna be down there till they find these guys. And the chief won't let them on the land. This would be Chief Cabazon. Chief Cabazon wouldn't let them on, and Wilson got tired of the argument and said, "You are now my prisoner. You, Chief, and all the Indians with you are my hostage, and we'll just wait here until somebody brings back the heads of these 3 guys that we're looking for." A few days later, the heads show up. In gratitude, Wilson gave them the entire pack train, because they'd planned to do this for a long time. They went shopping at the factory outlets and then went back to Riverside. The war comes, Mexican-American War. Both sides want him. Wilson has lived in Mexico now for most of his adult life. Fluent in Spanish, one of the leaders of one of the Californios. And of course the Americans want him too. Commodore Stockton is coming up the coast, and he gives him a commission in the U.S. Army as a captain to be in charge of, to raise an army, U.S. Army, and fight for the U.S. to defeat Mexico. So he leads the troops in the first battle of the Mexican War. Goes very, very badly for him. He's captured. He's POW in Boyle Heights, and sits out the war. I forgot to mention he got married along the way. He owned Riverside. He married the daughter of the rancher next door. The rancher next door owned Orange County. So this is Bernardo Yorba. He married Yorba's daughter. Who would Bernardo Yorba's daughter's name be?
Linda.
Yeah, everybody says Linda. No, but you'll know the name. It's Ramona. Her name was Ramona. So he's 32, she's 14. No, 15, I'm sorry. She's 32, 15. 9 months, 1 day, 9 months and 1 day later, they have a child, a daughter. So he's in, he's a POW, and Ramona has another child. The war's over, and now he's instrumental in bringing both sides together. He's really a citizen of 2 worlds. Knows all the players on both sides, knows the cultures, and he puts Humpty Dumpty back together here. And moves into, now he doesn't have to commute to the Inland Empire, right? The 75-mile rule is gone, so he sells Rancho Jurupa to a guy named Rubidoux. Yeah, Rubidoux. Common, an important name out there. And he buys Union Station. He buys 12.5 acres at Alameda and what is now Cesar Chavez, where Union Station is. Now let me tell you something about what Los Angeles was like at that time. We're in 1850. The flag is flying, U.S. flag is flying over the city. There are exactly 2 trees in Los Angeles. It's a pepper tree and a sycamore tree. And a lot of fleas. And a lot of dogs. A lot more dogs than people running around in packs of up to 100 dogs in these packs. There are chain gangs on the streets. Chain gangs of slaves. Not black slaves, Indian slaves, or what amounts to Indian slaves, sold into servitude every Monday morning from the jails, those that can't pay their fine or make bail. And in a cycle that just keeps going and going. There are camel caravans, camels in the streets. Los Angeles is the end of the camel caravan route, devised by the U.S. Secretary of War, U.S. Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis. There are, and it's the most dangerous town in America then or now or ever. You've seen hundreds of Wild West movies in your life about the shoot-'em-up towns in the far west, and that's it. And then you know about sleepy Los Angeles, you know, out of the way of everything, just the fleas, the dogs, and the dust on the ground. Both of those stories are wrong. There was no gun violence in the western towns. This is a myth of Hollywood. Places like Tombstone would have one gun death a year, maybe two, maybe zero. And the same is true of all those other famous names. And the reason was there was very, very strict gun control. When you came into town, you gave your guns to the marshal. He kept them until you left town. There were no guns in town. Los Angeles, on the other hand, the murder rate was 1,000 times what it is today. Or put it in mathematical, how many passed math in school? I can't raise my hand because I was a history major, but you'll understand this. 1,600 people in LA County then. 1,600, 10 million today. 1,600, 10 million, the number of murders per year is about the same. The reason it was such a dangerous place is because the dregs of the earth came across to the gold rush in Northern California. People with jobs didn't come here. People, you know, educated people with careers, just the, you know, people that hadn't made it anywhere else. And when they didn't make it in the gold fields, they went to San Francisco, nearby. San Francisco had a very strong vigilance committee. It was a well-organized city. So drove them out. So they came down here where there wasn't much of an infrastructure at all. And the most dangerous single block in America ever, by far, Calle de los Negros, ran southwest from the plaza. One block of houses of prostitution and casinos, gambling. Somebody would cheat, kill him on the spot, throw the body in the street, keep going. Somebody find it the next day. There were so many murders that the coroner would perform autopsies and just leave the body, leave the carved up body where it was. It held 11 inquests in one day. That's so. So it becomes a very, very active time for our guy. A junta met at the plaza at the northern side. There was a street. Can't remember the name of the street. That ran north from the plaza, and his house was right on that street. And he called a number of men together, and they decided who would hold all the offices. You know, it's going to be American government. Who wants to be mayor? Who wants to be the judge? Who wants to? What do you want? So our guy is the county clerk. So he is the person. Wilson is the guy who set up American government here from day one. The government that we have today is, you know, what he began to set up. There were more speaking roles than there were actors, and so everybody had to double up. You had a county job and a city job. So his was, so he was on the LA City Council, became the second mayor of Los Angeles. The mayor of Los Angeles was the coroner, cutting up all those bodies. The city attorney and the county attorney was, city attorney and the county attorney was the same person, same man. There was a property dispute and he represented both sides. Really did, that's not a joke, he did. So it's a very, very active time for Wilson. buys up much of downtown, bought Westwood. Any of you could have afforded Westwood. $1,600, you get all of Westwood, UCLA. Bought Beverly Hills. Built a 4-board fence all the way around Beverly Hills, the 3 sides, it's mountains, top. Built it almost precisely the same boundaries as today, a little larger by a few blocks. And Westwood and Santa Monica and Culver City and Wilmington and the West San Gabriel Valley. So he bought up a whole lot of Southern California. Became a state senator, became county supervisor, became state senator, represented everything from Tulare to the San Diego to the Mexican border, from the Pacific Ocean to the Colorado River. It was so sparsely populated that that was one senatorial district. Today, 2/3 of the state senate in Sacramento divide up what this man represented alone. So he's no longer a POW. He's got 2 babies, and Ramona dies. So he's a widower with 2 babies in the most dangerous town in America ever, a block away from the worst block in America ever. So he hires a governess who moves in with her good-for-nothing husband to take care of the 2 babies. The husband died. So now what do you think happened? She was Margaret Herford. Her maiden name and her married name were the same because she married her cousin in Alabama. So Margaret Herford Wilson now I've read all of her letters. I've read hundreds of her letters. I've read every letter that they saved. And it's a very, very unhappy woman. A woman of society who was taken through the frontier by her good-for-nothing husband trying to make a killing, and just the world's worst business, a doctor who was the world's worst businessman. And she's basically reduced to taking in laundry at the end. This hybrid woman, and very unhappy. She does not like her circumstances at all. It's the classic Cinderella story. She marries one of the 4 wealthiest men, the top of society in LA, and she's no happier. Read her, the letters go on, she's still on there. But anyway, which he owns. I mean, he owns the West San Gabriel Valley. Then he moves to a place that's in what is today San Marino, overlooking a large lake, which is renamed Wilson's Lake. And then I just telescope his accomplishments. He grew wine, vast acreage of grapes. He supplied wine to Napa and Sonoma valleys in those days, grown in San Marino, which didn't allow alcohol to be sold there until recently. Interesting. He invented the icon of Southern California, the massive orange grove, the citrus groves. He was the first to do that. However you pronounce that in French, Vignes, V-I-G-N-E-S, Vignes Street by Union Station. He was the first to grow oranges, but not on that scale. Wilson did it on a massive scale. On the board of the first oil company, he brought railroads to Southern California. He's president of the first railroad. Built a port. There's no port, no natural port in Los Angeles. So he and Banning built what is today the largest artificial port in the world. And they built that. On and on and on and on the accomplishments of this guy. So I'll flip to the after his death. What happened to this vast empire that he built up? His daughter, born of Ramona, Maria de Jesus. She's the daughter of the richest guy in town. Of course, she married very, very well. A guy named Shorb. And he became the surrogate son to Wilson. Wilson's own son was a ne'er-do-well and a drunk, and he committed suicide. In the hotel that his father owned, I forgot to mention, he was a hotelier. He was at the Ritz-Carlton of his day here. So Shorb, Catholic, 11 children. And Shorb built a house on the hill overlooking Wilson's Lake, and traveled in his own rail car, really lived high. Too high. After he died, the whole thing fell apart, and everything that Wilson had built up was lost to the banks. Henry Huntington bought the Shorb property, tore down his house, and built his house exactly where the Shorb house is. So when you go to the Huntington Gardens, you go to the Huntington's house, that was where the Shorb house was. And then Margaret Hereford, he and Margaret Hereford Wilson had 2 daughters who married very, very, very well. And they married the same man at the same time. And for all intents and purposes, both loved the same man, George Smith, first and middle name. I'll tell you his last name later. And the older daughter was in love with him, but he married the younger daughter. And the older daughter, Annie, wasn't giving up. She showed up at the train station with her bags packed to go on the honeymoon with them. And they somehow talked her out of it, but she was waiting when they came back. Moved in with them, lived with them every day, the rest of his life. Traveled with them to Europe or wherever they went out to social events every night. You go to the Los Angeles Times, look up the name, lots of mentions in the society columns, and it will say present at the event were George Smith and Mrs. Ruth Smith, Mrs. Ruth, whatever the last name was, and Miss Annie Wilson, always together. There is the Church of the Savior in San Gabriel, which is their family church. Stained glass of all of these people that I'm talking about in the family, and there they are on the wall. George Smith, last name, and Ruth, and Miss Annie Wilson, and Annie Wilson is there with them. So for all intents and purposes, George Smith had 2 wives. She shared everything but his bed. He and Ruth had a son, and the kid didn't know. I mean, he had 2 mothers, 2 equal mothers, because he didn't know. I mean, everybody went to sleep at night, so that didn't count. He had 2 mothers, and the kid grew up to be George Smith Patton Jr. was the grandson of Don Benito Wilson.
Wow.
So let me just end with this. A study by the University of Purdue of authors talking about books. They said people come to places like the Westwood Library week after week to hear a different author, different subject. I said, what is their response to this? A different, same kind of as a Rotary meeting, a different speaker. What's the response? And they found that about 17% of any such audience like this listens to every word, maybe even takes notes, Another 22% dart in and out. Listen for a while. In and out, in and out. The entire rest of any such audience listens for the opening jokes, then kicks back and engages in wild sexual fantasy. So I'm happy to have been able to bring so much pleasure to this audience in Westwood tonight. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to take questions.
How old was he when he died?
He was, got to do the math. He died in 1878. He was born in 11. He was 67 years old.
And how? All that?
Pardon?
I said he bought all that area and did all the.
He was, yeah, he did an awful lot in those years. Actually, he bought all of that property within maybe a 10 year period.
How did he die?
He got sick one night and didn't get any better during the night and died in the morning, and they wrote it off as a heart attack. I talked to a cardiologist, and he said, hell, they called everything a heart attack back then. He said, there's no telling what he died of. If a person died, they said, well, it was a heart attack. So,
Where is he buried?
he is buried in that church, the church cemetery that I mentioned in San Gabriel, Church of the Savior. The largest tomb, the largest plot in the cemetery, and there is a cenotaph in that plot. A cenotaph is a grave marker where there is no body for General Patton, because he's buried in Belgium, but the whole rest of the family is there, and so there's a marker there as well. Yeah.
Are there heirs?
A lot. Oh well, the descendants, maybe not heirs, because the estate was wiped out. A lot of Shorbs, 11 kids, with all kinds of different names now. And then the Pattons, there were just a lot of Pattons, who were, a lot of Pattons. There are no Wilsons, because his son, who had his name, he committed suicide as a young man before marriage, and so there's no Wilsons. There are a lot around. One of them that I met, got to know, Barbara Vukanovich, was the congresswoman of Reno, from northern Nevada. I think maybe there are only 2 Congress people there because of the population. So she had half of the state, and a very, very conservative Republican. And she said, I just am so disappointed that my great-great-grandfather was a Democrat. And I said, well, you have to remember that in those days, the party labels were switched. Red was blue and blue was red.
Right.
The Democrats were the conservative. I invited her to come down. I had a big event in Pasadena, and Mike Antonovich was there, county supervisor. And so he immediately says, okay, what is your, Vich come from? It can be several different ethnicities of that Yugoslavian area. So the 2 Republicans with, heritage there, they had a great time together. I think we're out of gas, so thank you.
We got a certificate from Congresswoman Karen Bass, and I would like to invite Mr. Rutherford to present it to you.
Thank you for coming. On behalf of the West Los Angeles, Congresswoman Karen Bass present his certificate.
Wow, thank you. He never made it to Congress. There was a movement to get him to Congress, but she certainly represents an area that he owned. So I'm very, very grateful for this. This is a very nice thing. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
a
for
lot.
coming.
Thank you very much.
And if anybody wants the books, I'll tell you what I'll do. They're $27 each. It's $25 plus tax. Let's call it, so let's say $20 with tax. So, and then if you buy two, we'll knock $10 off of that. So, anyway, thanks for coming. Well, you know, it's about,
I suppose
you noticed
this man,
on the cover that
he was who he wasn't. his
Yes.
Rotary
Yeah, yeah.
people.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that.
Right.
in the
Yeah, so,
street.
Hi.
you know,
Alright.
Exactly.
you never know.
which
I'm
one?
very surprised there's no
This
electronic
guy.
format, because electronic format is
Right.
essentially
Would you like to sign?
there's no physical cost to it, so.
All right, it's just to,
I didn't think they made books without the electronic, because there's so many more books that are electronic now with no physical version.
STEFAN.
Well, I'm glad.
And they're local and
Look forward to reading.
in general, yes.
I like
Yeah,
history.
so that's what I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, it's about Los Angeles.
And who is
Well, my
that?
wife likes, crime, police, detectives, so she probably really enjoys it, so.
Tell you what,
I mean,
that was
all
it.
different kinds.
I'll leave
I'll
it
borrow
to
that,
you.
I just might buy it on Amazon. Sometimes I came with my books, they do
Hi, thank you for coming.
You accept donations?
Yes, we do, thanks, grateful.
Here,